我宣布
The 9,858th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is this situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted.
Mr. President, since I last addressed this Council, we have witnessed a significant, albeit fragile, development in the Middle East with the ceasefire in Gaza. We have also seen a cessation of attacks by Ansar Allah on vessels in the Red Sea and targets in Israel. This tentative reduction in hostilities, along with the release of the crew of the motor vessel Galaxy Leader, is a welcome relief. We must build on this opportunity as a foundation for further de-escalation. Yet, while we welcome this reprieve, we must also acknowledge the magnitude of the challenges still facing Yemen. Mr. President, a deeply troubling development is the fourth wave of arbitrary detentions of United Nations staff conducted by Ansar Allah last month. These detentions are not only a violation of fundamental human rights, but also a direct threat to the United Nations' ability to provide humanitarian assistance to millions in need. Even more deplorable is the death, while detained by Ansar Allah, of a UN colleague working for the World Food Programme. And I join the Secretary General in calling for an immediate, transparent and thorough investigation of his death and for those responsible to be held accountable. I also echo the Secretary General's strong condemnation of these detentions and call for their immediate and unconditional release along with the rest of the United Nations, NGO, civil society and diplomatic mission staff arbitrarily detained. I appreciate the support of this Council to the United Nations during this difficult time. Allow me also to express my deepest condolences to Ahmed's family and to the World Food Programme. Regrettably, we have also seen a continuation of military activity in Yemen, with reports of the movement of reinforcement and equipment towards the front lines, and shelling, drone attacks and infiltration attempts by Ansar Allah on multiple front lines, including in Abyan, Al-Dale, Laj, Ma'arib, Sada, Shabwa and Taiz. I call on the parties to refrain from military posturing and retaliatory measures that could lead to further tension and risk plunging Yemen back into conflict. My office remains in regular contact with the parties, urging them to de-escalate tensions and take concrete confidence-building measures through the Military Coordination Committee. Mr. President, I am deeply concerned about Yemen's rapidly deteriorating economic situation. These hardships are felt across all of Yemen. In government-controlled areas, residents have endured prolonged blackouts, sometimes for over 24 hours. Last week, Aden went 3 consecutive days without electricity, which led people taking to the streets. That this is happening in winter, when energy demand is lower, speaks to the severity of the crisis. Moreover, the continued depreciation of the Yemeni rial has sent the cost of essential goods soaring, making simply surviving a challenge for millions. For many families, even the most basic necessities, food, medicine and fuel, have become unaffordable. This economic hardship is not limited to government-controlled areas. In Ansar Allah-controlled territories, ordinary Yemenis also struggle to afford basic commodities. These hardships are symptoms of the failure to achieve a sustainable political resolution. Without the prospect of peace, there cannot be prosperity. My office continues its engagement with the parties to the conflict to advance sustainable, achievable, and practical solutions that will benefit the Yemeni population. As part of our continued political dialogues, my office has also recently engaged with civil society representatives, including youth and women from Aden, Abyan, Al-Dale, Lahej, and Shabwa, to incorporate local-level perspectives into the peace process. We also heard firsthand from Yemeni businesswomen across the country. Despite their potential to unlock economic growth and opportunities in Yemen, they are faced with growing impediments preventing them from fully participating in the economy, including regulatory constraints and limited access to banking. Women also continue to face similar challenges in engaging meaningfully in the peace process. Mr. President, while clarifications are sought regarding the upcoming US designation of Ansar Allah as a foreign terrorist organization, it is important that our efforts to advance the peace process are protected. I am committed to carrying out my duties in accordance with the mandate from this Council to end the conflict in Yemen. Over the past month, I have continued my active engagement with all regional and international actors, most recently in Washington. My message to all remains that only a political settlement of the conflict will support the Yemenis in their aspiration for lasting peace. It is achievable, it is possible, and it is pragmatic. The elements of the roadmap already provide a framework for this path forward. The parties committed to a nationwide ceasefire as the first step towards stability, recognizing that only an end to hostilities can create the conditions necessary for meaningful dialogue. This would pave the way for a structured political process in which Yemenis can determine their own future through inclusive negotiations under UN auspices. It is critically important that my office maintains appropriate space for engaging in effective mediation. Moreover, addressing Yemen's economic crisis through sustained dialogue and concrete measures will be vital for rebuilding the country and preventing further hardship for its people. In this regard, I urge the parties to seize the opportunity created by the recent regional de-escalation and to build confidence through meaningful actions. The unilateral release of 153 conflict-related detainees by Ansar Allah is a positive step, and I encourage further progress. It is high time the parties make the necessary compromises to reach an agreement for the release of all those still held in relation to the conflict. Mr. President, let me conclude with this. Yemen stands at another critical juncture. The choices made today will determine the course of its future. A sustainable resolution to this conflict is still possible. I am not naive. This will not be easy. It requires commitment, courage, and action from all sides. The parties must engage in good faith and take the necessary steps to turn commitments into reality. I am aware that some think that they could get a better outcome through the resumption of full-scale military operations. I want to be clear. This would be a mistake for Yemen and a mistake for the stability in the wider region. The responsibility to create the space for a mediated solution does not rest on the Yemeni parties alone. Regional and international stakeholders also share a duty to support diplomacy, de-escalation, and inclusive dialogue. A genuine and lasting peace must be fostered through collective efforts. This requires resolve and coordinated action. I remain fully committed to confronting challenges head-on with a clear, structured, and relentless approach. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
And my own country, Somalia. We express our gratitude to Special Envoy Grundmergs and USG Fletcher for their briefing, for their valuable updates on the latest developments in Yemen. I also welcome the Permanent Representative of Yemen to this meeting. The A3+ reiterates its unwavering support for UN-led and regional mediation efforts, including those spearheaded by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sultanate of Oman, aimed at achieving a Yemeni-owned and a Yemeni-led political resolution to the conflict. A sustainable and inclusive peace process with the meaningful engagement of all stakeholders, including women and youth, remains vital in responding to the aspirations of the Yemeni people. Mr. President, the recent developments in Yemen highlight both progress and challenges. The A3+ welcomes the release of the crew members of the Galaxy Leader who had been held by the Houthis since November of 2023. Their release marked a positive step for the UN staff and other humanitarian personnel in the efforts to build confidence and facilitate broader de-escalation efforts. However, the A3+ is deeply saddened by the tragic loss of a WFP staff member who died while in detention since January 23rd of 2025. We extend our heartfelt condolences to his family and colleagues at WFP and stand in solidarity with all arbitrarily detained UN personnel and their loved ones. The recent detention of additional UN staff is also deeply distressing. The A3+ demands the immediate and unconditional release of all UN, NGOs, civil society organizations, and diplomatic mission staff arbitrarily detained in Yemen, in accordance with international law and relevant international agreements. Furthermore, we insist that the Houthis seize all such illegal activities which undermine peace efforts and contribute to the instability in the country. We urge the parties in Yemen to focus on the following key priorities. First, we are deeply concerned about the continued threats and unlawful arrest and detention of UN personnel by the Houthis, resulting in the suspension of UN humanitarian activities in territories controlled by them. The security and humanitarian situation in Yemen remains fragile, with OCHA reporting that over half of the population need humanitarian assistance and protection services, including in Houthi-controlled Sa'da, which has a population of over 1 million people. While we recognize efforts to improve humanitarian conditions, we emphasize the urgent need for unhindered access to aid across all regions. Second, we reiterate our concerns about the continued attacks on commercial and maritime vessels in the Red Sea. The Houthi attacks in the Red Sea threaten global shipping and undermine regional stability. Such actions not only endanger international trade, but also pose severe risks to the marine ecosystem. We call on the Houthis to permanently cease these hostile activities and urge all parties to exercise restraint to prevent the broader regional crisis. Maritime security must remain a priority, and we support all diplomatic efforts to safeguard the Red Sea as a zone of peace and cooperation. Third, the impact of external military actions. The A3+ is concerned about the increase in external military interventions in Yemen, including Israeli airstrikes and the wider ramification of the Gaza conflict. These actions undermine peace efforts and further destabilize an already fragile situation. We urge all external actors to respect Yemen's sovereignty and refrain from military escalations. We also emphasize the importance of upholding the ceasefire in Gaza, as it will undoubtedly contribute to the de-escalation of the tensions and foster a conducive environment for achieving a lasting and sustainable peace in the broader region. Lastly, addressing food insecurity and economic hardship. The humanitarian crisis in Yemen continues to be exacerbated by food shortages and economic instability, with significant depreciation and rising inflation. According to recent reports, nearly half of the population, approximately 17 million people, will face severe food insecurity in 2025. Urgent and sustained international support is required to address this crisis. Noting that despite tremendous security and logistical challenges, humanitarian organizations were able to support over 8 million Yemenis last year. We call for increased funding for the 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan. We also stress the need for sustainable economic recovery mechanisms to support Yemen's long-term stability. Mr. President, the A3+ firmly believes that a stable and peaceful Yemen is critical for the broader regional security. We continue to advocate for a Yemeni-led and a Yemeni-owned peace process under UN auspices, and we urge all parties to prioritize dialogue over confrontation. In this regard, we reaffirm our support for Special Envoy Grunberg's mediation efforts and encourage all actors to engage constructively in confidence-building measures. Similarly, we emphasize the need for continued international support in addressing Yemen's humanitarian and economic challenges. Overturning the significant economic decline in Yemen after 13 years of conflict requires first and foremost a commitment by all Yemeni actors to peace, as well as support from regional and international partners. In conclusion, Mr. President, the A3+ underscores the critical importance of maintaining momentum toward a comprehensive and inclusive peace process. The people of Yemen have suffered for far too long. Now is time for the international community to redouble its efforts and stand united in pursuit of a peaceful and prosperous future for Yemen. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
And thank you, Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher, for your briefings that underscored the precarious situation in Yemen and Houthi threats to international peace and security. With material and financial support from Iran, the Houthis have launched numerous attacks on civilian infrastructure, fired at U.S. Navy warships dozens of times since 2023, and attacked commercial vessels indiscriminately. Moreover, they continue to detain UN, diplomatic, and NGO staff, including dozens of current and former U.S. locally employed staff members. The United States condemns the death of a WFP staff member who died while in Houthi detention, and we send our condolences to his family and colleagues. This colleague's death underscores the Iranian and Houthi threat against peace and security and the continuing threat of violence to all Houthi detainees, including United States locally employed staff. Iran's continued and unprecedented provision of weapons components, financial support, and training and technical assistance to the Houthis over more than a decade violates the arms embargo this Council imposed on the group. It is this body's responsibility to respond to Iran's flagrant violations of its resolutions and arming of terrorist groups. Every member of this Council, and especially those with direct channels to Iran, should press Iran's leaders to stop arming, funding, and training the Houthis, without which they would not be able to launch attacks that disrupt navigational rights and freedoms and put innocent civilians in harm's way. Iran must bear the costs of enabling these reckless and egregious attacks. The Houthis' activities threaten the security of American civilians and personnel in the Middle East, the safety of our closest regional partners, and the stability of global maritime trade and local economies. That is why the Trump administration has initiated a process to consider designating the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. This is an important step to respond to the threat to civilians and regional stability. It is imperative that the international community works together with regional partners to eliminate the Houthis' capabilities, which continue to threaten international shipping and innocent seafarers. The Houthis must permanently cease all attacks in the Red Sea and surrounding waterways without exception and immediately release all of the hundreds of detainees. We must also deprive the Houthis of illicit revenues that sustain their attacks and disrupt the growing relationship between the Houthis and other terrorist groups like al-Shabaab, including through the use of targeted sanctions. We reiterate our call for this Council to take steps to strengthen the UN verification and inspection mechanism. We call on member states to do their part by increasing funding that supports long-term planning, recruitment of staff, and critical infrastructure that is needed for enhanced capacity. UNVIM is a key means of preventing Iran and other malign actors from smuggling arms and related illicit material to the Houthis. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Pakistan thanks the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Mr. Hans Grunberg, and Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, for their valuable briefings and updates. We welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Yemen in this meeting and reiterate our support to the efforts of the government of Yemen to promote a political solution in his country. The ongoing conflict in Yemen, Mr. President, has emerged as a multi-dimensional crisis, graduating from the local to the regional and ultimately a crisis with global implications. We need to address the various facets of this crisis through effective diplomacy and a collective response. We reaffirm our support for the efforts of the United Nations, Special Envoy Grunberg, as well as regional initiatives, particularly by Saudi Arabia and Oman, to facilitate a negotiated political settlement. Pakistan also appreciates the continued engagement of the Special Envoy with regional countries and others involved in the Yemen crisis. Mr. President, while welcoming the release of the crew of Galaxy Leader, we strongly condemn the arbitrary detention of UN personnel and the staff of international and national NGOs and diplomatic missions by Ansarullah, including the most recent additional detentions. We are appalled at the tragic death of a World Food Programme staff member in Houthi custody in Sada and extend our deepest condolences to his family and loved ones. These actions by Ansarullah are a blatant violation of international humanitarian law. Ensuring the safety and security of UN personnel must remain a top priority for the international community. There should be accountability for such actions. We call for the immediate and unconditional release of all detained personnel. Mr. President, the continued suspension of UN operations due to these actions further exacerbate the already dire humanitarian crisis in Yemen. Nearly half of the population, over 17 million people, face acute food insecurity, while climate change-induced disasters, including floods and droughts, have displaced approximately 4.5 million individuals. This crisis necessitates a well-coordinated and robust international response. We urge donor countries to enhance their contributions to the 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan for Yemen, as just appealed by Tom Fletcher, and we call for an adequate response to address the urgent needs of the affected population in Yemen. Mr. President, Pakistan has condemned the Houthi attacks on commercial and merchant vessels. We take note of the Secretary General's report of 7 February 2025, which indicates that no new incidents of attacks on shipping have been recorded in the past month. This development is obviously related to the ceasefire in Gaza. It is imperative, therefore, to ensure that the ceasefire in Gaza continues and all three phases of the ceasefire agreement are implemented for the sake of peace in the occupied Palestinian territories as well as in the broader region, including Yemen. Mr. President, the December 2023 negotiations marked a significant step forward in Yemen. It is imperative to preserve and consolidate the progress which was made and ensure the full implementation of commitments towards lasting peace. We share the Special Envoy's view that the roadmap remains a viable path towards initiated by a nationwide ceasefire, a structural political process, and addressing critical economic and humanitarian challenges facing Yemen. The resumption of military operations would further exacerbate the conflict. Mr. President, in conclusion, Pakistan reiterates its full support for the efforts of the Special Envoy to facilitate a Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political process under UN auspices. We stand in solidarity with the people of Yemen in their pursuit for peace, stability, and prosperity. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President.
We thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Hans Grundberg, and the Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Tom Fletcher for their briefings. We continue following the situation in Yemen very closely, and we saw some positive developments there recently. The situation at the line of contact remains calm despite some local incidents, including in the province of Marib. It is clear that neither one of the Yemeni sides is interested in escalation on the ground. We note the efforts made by the official Yemeni authorities to restore the national economy and improving the living conditions of the people. As had been predicted by after there was an agreement on ending hostilities in the Gaza Strip, which came into effect on the 19th of January, there was a noticeable stabilization of the situation in the waters off Yemen. We note positively a statement made in this regard by the Ansar Allah movement about them ending the strikes against commercial ships in the Red Sea, and this is also confirmed in the most recent Secretary General's report. We welcome the fact that on the 22nd of January, with the support of Oman, the Houthis released the crew of the cargo vessel Galaxy Leader, and we do hope that in the very near future, the freedom of navigation in the Red Sea will be fully restored. At the same time, we are concerned by information about the continued detention by Houthis of the local UN staff. At the end of January in Saad, 8 more people were arrested. Under these conditions, the United Nations declared that it was temporarily suspending the operations in that province. We express condolences related to the death of a WFP staff on the 10th of February. Such incidents have no justification, regardless of where they take place in Yemen or any other part of the world. At the same time, the situation as regards the earlier people detained has not been fully resolved either. I would like to recall here that the humanitarians have their privileges and immunities, which must mandatorily be upheld by all parties. We note the continued work that's being done by the United Nations to find out the background of what happened, ensuring the humanitarian access to the detainees and creating the conditions for the eventual release. And this has already given us some results. At the end of last year, the Houthis released 4 people. We, for our part, continue helping the United Nations here as much as we can. Mr. President, taking the general stabilization in Yemen I mentioned and around Yemen, we can say that what is happening is an opportunity to use this positive trend and enhance the comprehensive political efforts to relaunch the political settlement. This would be important inter alia to make sure that we do not lose the outcome of the long work on the roadmap that's been conducted here. We call on all parties to immediately restart the negotiating process. The international mediation is very important here to continue its targeted and inclusive work with Yemeni protagonists, including Ansar Allah, so as to get to sustainable parameters of normalization conflict as quickly as possible. And we stand ready to continue providing whatever help we can to the Special Envoy Grundberg here. And then on the basis of such agreements in the future, what could be launched is an international legal basis for the Yemeni settlement so as to correctly reflect the current military political realities in the country. Under the current conditions, what becomes very important are measures to restore trust, the so-called small steps practice, which can bridge the gap between parties to the conflict. And we welcome, therefore, here the release by Houthis done unilaterally of 153 prisoners of war at the end of January, which was done through the International Committee of Red Cross and Red Crescent. Mr. President, wide international cooperation is also needed to rectify the humanitarian situation in Yemen. The number of people who need such assistance last year reached 19.5 million, which is 1.5 million than last year. More than half of these households throughout the country are experiencing food shortages. Child mortality is going up, including from very treatable diseases, and the reason for that is a shortage of medications and lack of access to qualified health care. There is also a serious shortage of targeted funding for humanitarian programs, including the humanitarian response plan for Yemen. In 2025, we'll need $2.5 billion US. So as to rectify this situation, what is needed is not just larger humanitarian funding, but also remove the obstacles which are impeding humanitarian supplies to the needy throughout the Yemen. Against this background, to be perfectly frank, what came out like a lightning out of the blue was information about launching a process to include the Houthis in the U.S. list of foreign terrorist organizations. This step can not only seriously impede the work of humanitarians in Yemen, but also have a negative impact on further mediation efforts to relaunch the political process. The decision by Washington to increase pressure on Ansar Allah and creating, therefore, additional motives for escalation looks completely divorced from reality. The ill-considered steps taken by the previous administration of the White House resulted in a more than a year delay in the confrontation of the Houthis and the worsening of the suffering of the Yemeni people. Now, when the situation seemingly began to de-escalate, the U.S. is undertaking steps which will lead to its escalating. To be perfectly honest, a conclusion begs itself that the United States is not interested in the Yemeni settlement with the Houthi participation, who are an integral part of the Yemeni society. I'd like to believe that this initiative is undertaken by the new administration in a rush without proper analysis and will be revised. Otherwise, the blame for undermining efforts to establish a long-hoped-for peace in Yemen will be laid at Washington's door. I thank you.